Phyllis got up and went to the window. From where she stood, at the side of it, she had a view of the blue water stretching to the horizon. "Mike," she said, "I'm sorry about yesterday. The thing, this ship going down like that, suddenly got to me. Until now, this has been a sort of guessing game, a puzzle. Losing the bathyscope with poor Wiseman and Trent was bad, and so was losing the naval ships. But this, well, it suddenly seemed to put it into a different category. A big liner full of ordinary, harmless men, women and children peacefully asleep to be wiped out in a few seconds in the middle of the night. It's somehow a different class of thing altogether. Do you see what I mean? Naval people are always taking risks doing their jobs, but these people on a liner hadn't anything to do with it. It made me feel that those things down there had been a working hypothesis that I had hardly believed in, and now, all at once, they'd become horribly real. I don't like it, Mike. I suddenly started to feel afraid. I don't quite know why." I went over and put an arm round her. "I know what you mean," I said. "I think it is part of it. The thing is not to let it get us down." She turned her head. "Part of what?" she asked, puzzled. "Part of the process we're going through. The instinctive reaction. The idea of an alien intelligence here is intolerable to us. We must hate and fear it. We can't help it. Even our own kind of intelligence, when it goes a bit off the rails in drunks and crazies, alarms us not very rationally. You mean I'd not be feeling quite the same way about it if I knew that it had been done by, well, the Chinese or somebody? Do you think you would? I'm not sure. Well, for myself, I'd say I'd be roaring with indignation. Knowing that it was somebody hitting well below the belt, I'd at least have a glimmering of who, how and why to give me a focus. As it is, I've only the haziest impressions of the who, no idea about the how, and a feeling about the why that makes me go cold inside, if you really want to know." She pressed her hand on mine. "I'm glad to know that, Mike. I was feeling pretty lonely yesterday. My protective coloration isn't intended to deceive you, my sweet. It is intended to deceive me," she thought. "I must remember that," she said, with an air of extensive implication that I am not sure I have fully understood yet. One of the grubs in the raspberry at Rose Cottage was that our guests almost invariably arrived in the middle of the night, having A, overestimated the average speed they would maintain, B, spent longer over dinner on the way than they had intended, C, developed in the course of the last few miles a compulsion towards bacon and eggs. Harold and Tooney were no exception. 2:10 a.m. on Saturday was the time when I heard their car draw up. I went out into the moonlight and found Harold pulling things out of the boot, while Tooney, who had not been there before, looked about her with a doubtful expression, which cleared somewhat as she recognized me. "Oh, it is the right place," she said. "I was just telling Harold it couldn't be because—" "I'm sorry," I apologized. "We shall really have to grow some. Everybody expects it of us, except the natives." "I've explained," said Harold, "but you won't have it. All you kept on saying was that in Cornwall rose doesn't mean rose." "It doesn't," I told her. "It means heath." "Well, then, I don't see why you don't call it Heath Cottage to make it plainer." "Let's go inside," I suggested, laying hold of a case. Wondering why one's friends chose to marry the people they did is unprofitable but recurrent. One could so often have done so much better for them. For instance, I could think of 3 girls who would have been better for Harold in their different ways. One who would have pushed him, another would have looked after him, the third would have amused him. It is true that they were none of them quite as decorative as Tooney, but that's not— well, it's something like the difference between the room you live in and the one in the Ideal Home exhibition. However, there it was, and as Phyllis said, a girl who makes good with a name like Petunia must at least have something her parents didn't have. The bacon and eggs made their appearance. Tooney admired the plates, which were part of a set that we had found in Milan, and presently she and Phyllis were well away. After a while, I asked Harold how the metal fatigue theory was going down. He held a public relations job with a large engineering firm, so he'd be likely to know. He looked at me, gave a quick glance at Tooney, who was still chatting China. "It's not pleasing our people a lot," he said briefly, and then switched over to telling me of some minor noise that his car had developed on the way down. Untraceable noises in other people's cars tend to bore. This one was so mysterious in its habits that I suggested that we put it down to metal fatigue and leave it at that until the morning at least. Across the table, Toonie caught the phrase. She gave there used to be something called a tinkling laugh. This was probably it. Metal fatigue, she repeated, and tinkled again. Harold said hurriedly, "We were talking about the funny noise the car was making, dear." Toonie paid him no attention. "Metal fatigue," she repeated. Well, since there is nothing intrinsically funny in metal fatigue, we judged that her amusement was the kind that invites inquiry. In our lack of response, we were not being wilfully unkind, merely contra-suggestible. Besides, it was 10 minutes to 3 a.m. Harold pushed back his chair. "It's been a pretty long run," he said, "I think." But Toonie was not to be stalled. "Oh, my dear," she said, "you don't mean to say that people down here really believe all that stuff about metal fatigue?" I caught Phyllis's surprised eye. I was somewhat taken aback myself. Earlier I'd been saying that it was well done and the general public would believe it because they would prefer to believe it. Now here was Toonie confuting me almost at once. I glanced at Harold, who was looking at his plate. He would not, I decided, be the one who had enlightened Toonie. She belonged irretrievably to the class of woman who believes from the church door that, having let her bring it off, her man must be a mental weakling, and that any views he may put forward should be treated accordingly. "Why not?" asked Phyllis. "There's nothing very new about the idea of metal fatigue." "Of course not," Toonie agreed. "That's where they are being clever in putting this out. I mean, it's the kind of thing lots of quite sensible people will fall for," she added kindly. "But in this case, it's all quite phony, of course." I was about to speak when a look from Phyllis quenched me. It was the kind of look I sometimes get when she's doing her stuff. "But it's practically official. It's in all the papers," she said. "Oh, my dear, surely you don't believe official statements any more," said Toonie indulgently. "Of course they had to make some kind of statement or else do something about it. And it being only a Japanese steamer made a difference, but it's pretty much like Munich all over again." "Oh, come, I'd not go as far as that," said Phyllis in mild expostulation, while I was still wondering how on earth we'd arrived at Munich. "Near enough," Toonie told her. "If they can do it once and have the whole thing explained away for them, they'll just be encouraged to do it again and go on doing it. The only proper way of dealing with it is to take a firm stand. It's simply no good appeasing and dodging. We ought to have called their bluff months and months ago." "Bluff?" repeated Phyllis, raising her eyebrows. "All this story about things in the sea and those balloon things and all that silly stuff about Martians and so on." "Martians?" Phyllis said bemusedly. "Well, Neptunians, it's the same sort of thing. The rubbish that Bocker man put about. I can't think why he wasn't arrested long ago. I happen to know from someone who used to know him that he joined the party when he first went up to the university, and of course he's been working for them ever since. He didn't invent it, I don't mean that. No, the whole thing was thought up in Moscow, and they just used him to put it across because he was influential, and he did it very well. That story about the things in the sea was all over the world, and a lot of people believed it for a bit, but of course he's quite done for now. That doesn't matter to them. They do that to people. He was just wanted to lay a foundation, you see?" We had begun to see. "But the Russians tried to explode the idea. They said at the time it was just a smokescreen to cover the preparations of warmongers," I pointed out. "That," said Toonie, "wasn't even subtle. It's their regular technique to get in the first accusation against someone else of what they're doing themselves." "You mean that the whole thing has been engineered by them right from the beginning?" asked Phyllis. "But of course," Toonie told her. "Quite a long time ago now they had their first try with the flying saucers, but that didn't come off, because most people didn't believe in them, and nobody was really scared. So this time they improved it. First they sent out the red balloons to puzzle people. Then there was all this business about the bottom of the sea that Bocker helped to spread, and to make that more convincing they cut cables and even sank a few ships." What with?" I inquired. "With these new midget submarines of theirs, of course. The same kind that they used on this Japanese ship. And now they'll just be able to go on sinking ships because once people have seen through this metal fatigue business, they'll just say it's being done by the Bocker things in the sea. As long as people believe that, there'll be no popular backing for reprisals." So the metal fatigue idea was just put about to keep people quiet, Phyllis asked. Exactly, Tooney agreed. The government doesn't want to admit that it's the Russians because then there would be a demand that they should take action. And they can't afford to do that with all the red influence there is. But if they officially pretend to think it's these Bocker things, well, then they'd have to pretend too that they were doing something about that. And that'd make them look pretty silly later when it's all exploded. So this is their way out. And as it's only a Japanese ship, it's all right, for the moment. But it won't last long. We can't afford to have the Russians getting away with this kind of thing. People are starting to demand a strong line and no more appeasement. People, I put in. People in Kensington and some other places, Tooney explained. Phyllis looked thoughtful as she collected the plates. It's shocking how out of touch one gets in a little place like this, she said with a slightly apologetic air, and for all the world as if she'd been immured in Rose Cottage for several years. Harold choked a little and coughed. Then he yawned largely. More fresh air than I'm used to, he explained, and helped to break the party up by carrying out the plates. In the course of the weekend we learnt more about Russian intentions, though their reasons for sinking a harmless passenger liner never emerged very clearly. The Sunday papers all had articles informative in different degrees on metal fatigue, and Tooney had a nice day reading them with the smile of a cognoscente. Whatever might be the opinion in Kensington and the lesser Kensingtons of other towns, it was clear that the official theory was being well received in Cornwall. The public bar of the Pick in Penlyn had its own expert on the crystalline structure of metals, with several tales to tell of mysterious collapses of mine machinery which could be attributed to nothing but brittleness induced by prolonged vibration. All old miners, he said, had known this by instinct, long before the scientists got at it, and also, since matters of the sea are of perennial interest to all Cornishmen, heads were knowledgeably shaken over the behaviour of certain Liberty ships. Harold looked a little worried as we left there to walk back to the cottage. I can see a busy time ahead, he said gloomily. Months of writing stuff to prove that none of our products can possibly suffer from metal fatigue. What's it matter? They'll have to use your products, I said. Yes, but all our competitors will be saying how their goods aren't affected by it, so it'll look bad if we don't do the same. I'll have to put in for an extra allocation, he grumbled. If only the damned ship had turned turtle, nobody would have been greatly surprised, seeing its nationality, and there'd have been no need for all this. What's more, he added, there's such a lot of trouble for so little result. A good many million people may be lapping it up, but it isn't going home in the places that matter. How much of that is due to Tooney's friends with their usual universal political solvent, and how much to other causes, I wouldn't know, but the fact remains that the number of passage cancellations has risen well above average, and the number of extra airline bookings about balances it. Also, do you happen to have noticed the shipping shares? I said that I had. Well, that isn't good. It wouldn't be Tooney's friends selling just now. It points to a number of people who aren't satisfied with the metal fatigue or the Red Menace explanations. Well, are you? I asked. No, of course not, but that isn't the point. I'm not the kind of fellow who can make a difference to the price of shipping shares. The chaps who can are influential. If they start a scare, people start cancelling orders and trade bogs down. It doesn't matter a hoot whether there are things at the bottom of the sea or not. What does matter is if people swing back to thinking there are. If they do, we'll have a worse trade recession than last time. He paused. Then he added, and you people haven't helped a lot either. We've not been doing world trade a lot of harm lately, I told him. We've not had the chance. I don't say we haven't got a few scripts up our sleeves against the day when truth shall be more important than world trade. But for the last few months now, not a word about those things down there has gone out from any of our transmitters. The sponsors don't like it. Good for them, interrupted Harold. Any more than the advertisers like the mention of Hitler when we were on the brink of World War II, I concluded. Implying just what? Asked Harold. Well, roughly that if you do happen to have any money in shipping, I should take it out and put it into aircraft. Harold gave a disapproving grunt. I know you and Phil have been specialising in this thing and following it along. What you've learnt seems to have convinced you, but have you any solution? I shook my head. Well then, what good do you think you'll do to anybody by simply broadcasting "whoa, whoa"? All that happened in that scare after the first atomic depth bomb was that a lot of people were worried. Trade fell off and everyone suffered, to no purpose. And then it took a lot of work to get them all soothed down again. If there is anything in it, then let them worry when they have to, but leave them in peace till then. If, I repeated. What do you suppose sank that ship, Harold? When did any good come of burying your head in the sand? It's safer for my neck than sticking it out, said Harold, rather pleased with himself. I found that Phyllis, when I recounted the gist of the conversation to her later, took a not dissimilar view. If we had come across a single practical suggestion for countering the things, it would have been worth campaigning for it, but we haven't, she said. All my life I've been surrounded by things I'd rather not know too much about, so I've come to feel that truth, made naked without purpose, is really a wanton. I say, that was rather good, wasn't it? Where did I put my notebook? Toonie and Harold duly departed, and we settled again to our tasks. Phyllis to the search for something which had not already been said about Beckford of Fonthill, I to the less literary occupation of framing a series on royal love matches, to be entitled provisionally either The Heart of Kings or Cupid Wears a Crown. A pleasant month followed. The outer world intruded little. Phyllis finished the Beckford script and 2 more, and picked up the threads of the novel that never seemed to get finished. I went steadily ahead with the task of straining the royal love lives free from any political contaminations, and writing an article or 2 in between to clear the air a bit. On days that we thought were too good to be wasted, we went down to the coast and bathed, or hired a sailing dinghy. The newspapers forgot about the Yatsashiro. Local parlance had adopted the term metal fatigue as a useful cover for various misfortunes, and the terms china fatigue and glass fatigue were becoming current conveniences. The deep sea, and all our speculations concerning it, seemed very far away. Then, on a Wednesday night, the 9 o'clock bulletin announced that the Queen Anne had been lost at sea. The report was very brief. Simply the fact followed by, "No details are available as yet, but it is feared that the list of the missing may prove to be very heavy indeed." There was silence for 15 seconds. Then the announcer's voice resumed. "The Queen Anne, the current holder of the transatlantic record, was a vessel of 90,000 tons displacement. She was built—" I leant forward and switched off. We sat looking at one another. Tears came into Phyllis's eyes. The tip of her tongue appeared, wetting her lips. "The Queen Anne! Oh, God," she said. She searched for a handkerchief. "Oh, Mike, that lovely ship." I crossed to sit beside her and put my arm round her. For the moment she was seeing simply the ship as we had last seen her putting out from Southampton, a creation that had been somewhere between a work of art and a living thing shining and beautiful in the sunlight, moving serenely out towards the high seas, leaving a flock of little tugs bobbing behind. But I knew enough of her to realize that in a few minutes she would be on board, dining in the fabulous restaurant, or dancing in the ballroom, or up on one of the decks watching it happen, feeling what they must have felt there. I put my other arm round her and held her closer. I am thankful that such imagination as I myself have is more prosaic, and seated further from the heart. Half an hour later the telephone rang. I answered it and recognized the voice with some surprise. "Oh, hello, Freddie, what is it?" I asked, for 9:30 in the evening was not a time that one expected to be called by the EBC's Director of Talks and Features. "Good, afraid you might be out. Have you heard the news?" "Yes." "Well, we want something from you on this deep-sea menace of yours, and we want it quick, half-hour length." "But look here, the last thing I was told was to lay off any hint." "This has altered all that. It's a must, Mike. You don't want to be too sensational, but you do want to be convincing. Make 'em really believe there is something down there. Look here, Freddie, if this is some kind of leg pull, it isn't. It's an urgent commission." "That's all very well, but for over a year now I've been regarded as the dumb coot who can't let go of an exploded crackpot theory. Now you suddenly ring me at about the time when a fellow might have made a fool bet at a party and say, 'Hell, I'm not at a party, I'm at the office and likely to be here all night.'" "Well, you'd better explain," I told him. "It's like this. There's a rumour running wild here that the Russians did it. Somebody launched that one off within a few minutes of the news coming through on the tape. Why the hell anybody'd think they'd want to start anything that way, heaven knows, but you know how it is when people are emotionally worked up. They'll swallow anything for a bit. My own guess is that it is the let's have a showdown now school of thought seizing the opportunity. Damn fools anyway, it's got to be stopped. If it isn't, there might be enough pressure worked up to force the government out or make it send an ultimatum or something, so stopped it's damned well going to be. Metal fatigue isn't good enough this time, so the line is to be your deep-sea menace. Tomorrow's papers are using it. The Admiralty is willing to play. We've got several big scientific names already. The BBC's next bulletin and ours will have good, strong hints in order to start the ball rolling. The big American networks have started already, and some of their evening editions are coming on the streets with it. So if you want to put in your own pennyworth towards stopping the atom bombs falling, get cracking right away. OK, a half-hour feature. What angle? It's to be a topical special. Serious, but not blood-curdling. Not too technical. Intelligent, man-in-the-street stuff. Above all, convincing. I suggest the line, "Here is a menace more serious and more quickly developed than we had expected. A blow that has found us as unprepared as the Americans were at Pearl Harbor. But men of science are mobilizing already to give us the means to hit back, etc. Cautious but confident optimism. OK? I'll try, though I don't know what the optimism is to be founded on. Never mind about that, just express it. Your primary job is to help fix the thing in their minds as a fact, so that it keeps out this anti-Russian nonsense. Once that is well established, we can find ways to keep it going." "You think you'll need to?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "Well, after the Yatsu, and now this, it looks to me as if things may have gone over to the offensive, and these won't be the only ones to suffer." "I'd not know about that. The thing is, will you get down to this right away? And when you're through, ring us, and we'll have a recorder fixed ready for you. You'll give us a free hand to fiddle around as necessary. The BBC are sure to have something along pretty similar lines." "OK, Freddie, you shall have it," I agreed, and hung up. "Darling," I said, "work for us?" "Oh, not tonight, Mike. I couldn't." "All right," I said, "but it's work for me." I handed on what Freddie Whittier had just told me. "It looks," I went on, "as if the best way would be to decide the thesis and the style and approach, and then rake together the bits out of old scripts that will suit it. The devil of it is that most of the scripts and all the data are in London. We can remember enough. It doesn't have to be intellectual. In fact, it mustn't," Phyllis said. She thought for some moments. "We've got all that organised scoffing to break down," she added. "If the papers really do their stuff tomorrow morning, it ought to be cracked a bit. Our job is pressing home what they will have started. But we need a line. The first thing people are going to ask is, if this thing is so serious, why has nothing been done, and why have we been hoodwinked? Well, why?" I considered. "I don't think that need be too difficult. Viz, the sober, sensible people of the West would have reacted wisely, and no doubt will. But the more emotional and excitable peoples elsewhere have less predictable reactions. It was therefore decided as a matter of policy that the service chiefs and scientists who have been studying the trouble should preserve discretion, in the hope that it might be scotched before it became serious enough to cause public alarm. How's that?" "Yes, as good as we're likely to get," she agreed. "Then we can use Freddie's unpreparedness angle as a challenge. The brains of the world getting together and turning the full force of modern science and technique on the job of avenging the loss and preventing any more. A duty to those who have been lost, and a crusade to make the seas safe." "That's what it is, Mike," Phyllis said quietly, and with a reproving note. "Of course it is, darling. Why do you so often think that I say what I say by accident? Well, you start off as if truth is going to be the first casualty, as usual, and then end up like that. It's kind of bewildering. Never mind, my sweet. I intend to write it the right way. Now you run up to bed, and I'll get on with it." "To bed? What on earth?" "Well, you said you couldn't." "Don't be absurd, darling. Do you think I'm going to let you loose on this on your own? Now, which of us had the atlas last?" It was 11 o'clock the next morning when I made my mazy way into the kitchen and subconsciously got together coffee and toast and boiled eggs and fumbled back upstairs with them. It had been after 5 that morning when I had finished dictating our combined work in the recording machine in London, by which time we had both been too tired to know whether it was good or bad or to care. Phyllis lit a cigarette to accompany the second cup of coffee. "I think," she suggested, "that we'd better go into Falmouth this morning." So to Falmouth we went, and in the course of duty visited 4 of the most popular bars in that port. Freddie Whittier had not exaggerated the need for swift action. The rumour of Russian responsibility for the loss of the Queen Anne was tentatively about already, noticeably stronger among the double scotches than among the pints of beer. There could have been little doubt that it would have swept the field but for the unanimity with which the morning papers had laid responsibility on the things down below. In the circumstances, their solidarity succeeded in producing an impression that the anti-Russian talk must be an entirely local product, sponsored by a few well-known local diehards and fire-eaters. That did not mean, however, that the deep-sea menace was fully accepted. Too many people could recall their first uncritical alarm, followed by their swing to derision, to be able to make the new volte-face all at once. But the serious views in the morning's leaders had got as far as damping the derision and causing many to wonder whether there might not have been something in it after all. It looked to me as if, assuming that we had a fair sample, the first objective had been reached. The danger of a concerted popular demand for war on the wrong enemy had been averted. Undoing the effects of a year or more's propaganda and establishing the reality of an enemy that could not even be described were matters for steady perseverance. "Tomorrow," said Phyllis, knocking back the fourth gin and lime occasioned by our researches, "I think we ought to go back to London. You must have quite enough of those morganatic marriages in the bag to be going on with, and there'll probably be quite a lot of work for us to do on this business." It was only in expressing the idea that she had forestalled me. The next morning we made our customary early start. When we arrived at the flat and switched on the radio, we were just in time to hear of the sinkings of the aircraft carrier Meritorious and the liner Carib Princess. The Meritorious, it will be recalled, went down in mid-Atlantic, 800 miles southwest of the Cape Verde Islands. The Carib Princess not more than 20 miles from Santiago de Cuba. Both sank in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, and from each very few survived. It is difficult to say whether the British were the more shocked by the loss of a brand-new naval unit, or the Americans by their loss of one of their best-found cruising liners with her load of wealth and beauty. Both had already been somewhat stunned by the Queen Anne, for in the great Atlantic races there was community of pride. Now the language of resentment differed, but showed the characteristics of a man who had been punched in the back in a crowd and is looking round, both fists clenched, for someone to hit. The American reaction appeared more extreme, for in spite of the violent nervousness of the Russians existing there, a great many found the idea of the deep-sea menace easier to accept than did the British, and a clamour for drastic, decisive action swelled up, giving a lead to a similar clamour at home. In a pub off Oxford Street I happened across the whole thing condensed. A medium-built man, who might have been a salesman in one of the large stores, was putting his views to a few acquaintances. "All right," he said, "say for the sake of argument they're right. Say there are these whatsits at the bottom of the sea. Then what I want to know is why we're not getting after 'em right away. What do we pay for a navy for? And we've got atom bombs, haven't we? Well, why don't we go out to bomb 'em to hell before they get up to more trouble? Sitting down here and letting them think they can do as they like isn't going to help. Show 'em, is what I say. Show 'em quick and show 'em proper. Oh, thanks, mine's a light ale." Somebody raised the question of poisoning the ocean. "Well, damn it, the sea's big enough. It'll get over it. Anyway, you could use HE2, he suggested. Somebody else agreed that the size of the sea was a point. Indeed, there was an awful lot of it for games of blind man's buff. The first man wouldn't have that. "They said the deeps," he pointed out. "They've kept on talking about the deeps. Then, for God's sake, why don't they get cracking right away and sock the deeps good and hard? They do know where they are, anyway. Who bought this one? Here's luck." "I'll tell you why, chum," said his neighbour, "if you want to know. It's because the whole thing's a lot of bloody eyewash, that's why. Things in the frickin' deeps, for Christ's sake. Horse marines, Dan Dare and bloody Martians. Look, tell me this. We lose ships, the Yanks lose ships, the Japs lose ships. But do the Russians lose ships? Do they, hell? And I'd like to know why not." Somebody suggested that it might be because the Russians hadn't many ships anyway. Somebody else remembered that away back at the time when the Kiewanor was lost, the Russians had lost a ship, and not quietly either. "Ah," said the complainant, "but where are the independent witnesses? That's just the kind of camouflage you could expect from them." The feeling of the meeting, however, was not with him, but neither was it altogether with the first speaker. A third man seemed to talk for most of them when he said, "You've got a plan for it, like anything else, I suppose. But I must say—" "Well, thanks, old man, just one for the road. I must say it'd make you feel easier to know someone was really doing something about it."
The Kraken Wakes was written by John Wyndham and read by Stephen Moore. The programme was produced in Belfast by Susan Carson.